Pema CD Hong Hong Ahong Benzaguru Pema CD Hong Hong Ahong Benzaguru Pema CD Hong. Welcome everyone to my Sunday afternoon Dharma talk here at the Buddha Center. I apologize for being 30 minutes late. I found myself a little bit delayed today. However, here we are for our final talk on the Digha Nikaya. So, I have nothing more to say about that, so let's just dig right into it. It will take probably a little over an hour today. During the previous 34 weeks, more or less, we have discussed all 34 suttas of the Digha Nikaya. The first book of the... Oh, and please, feel free to ask questions anytime during the course of the talk. Don't feel that you have to hold your questions till the end of the talk. So, as I was saying, during the previous 34 weeks, more or less, we have been discussing all 34 suttas of the Digha Nikaya, the first book of the Sutta Pitaka of the Pali Canon, in some depth. Today I will summarize the main points that have emerged during the course of these talks. This will of necessity be a high-level summary, so it may appear somewhat arbitrary if you have not attended the previous sessions. However, if you have not attended the previous series of talks, I suggest you look on this talk as an introduction, and then take a look at the series, about 100,000 words, on my blog at www.palisuttas.com. And I'll just, for those of you, if any of you are new, just put that in the chat. Or even buy the book when it's available. As some of you will probably be aware, we will also be holding a draw for the book, a beautiful 400-page red cloth-bound book with dust jacket. This is in RL, not a PDF or a virtual book. At the end of the talk, we will conclude the talk with the dedication of merit, and then we'll hold the draw. So if you're interested in the exciting experience of the draw, I have everyone's name in a bag, so we're all ready to go. Stick around after the dedication of merit, and we will proceed with the draw. So let's beginning with the Buddhist worldview. Samsara, often translated rebirth, refers literally to time, which in the Buddhist worldview is cyclical. Thus, universes appear, expand, contract, and disappear in endlessly recurring cycles over vast eons of time. Samsara must be beginningless because to posit a beginning to existence posits the problem of a creator, which leads to an infinite regression. Moreover, how can there be a time before time? Therefore, time itself is paradoxically timeless, an eternal present or now. 4 cycles of time called kalpas, the Sanskrit word is kalpa, are referred to in the Pali Canon. Kalpa is generally translated as age, eon, or epoch. The 4 kalpas are referred to as the Ayu Kalpa, the life age, the Anta Kalpa, the small age, the Asankhya Kalpa, the medium age, and the Mahakalpa, the great age. The life age is the human lifespan, which in the Buddhist view ranges from a low of 10 years to a maximum of 80 or 84,000 years. Although some may doubt this longevity, there are tree colonies on Earth that are 80,000 years old, and some scientists believe that human functional immortality is within reach, possibly within the next 20 or 30 years. The small kappa is the time that it takes for the life kappa to increase to the maximum and then decrease back to the minimum again. 20 small ages make a medium age. 4 medium ages make a great age. According to the Pali English Dictionary, if a kappa is referred to with no other qualifier, a great age is implied. Each small age ends in a mass extinction event by famine, pestilence, or war. The great ages end in destruction by fire, water, or air. I remember when the idea of evolution, punctuated by cataclysms, used to be considered occult nonsense associated with people like Gurdjieff, Ouspensky, and Velikovsky. Both extraterrestrial and terrestrial cataclysms are now accepted as fact. that the moon was broken off from the primordial Earth by a violent impact between the Earth and a large asteroid or planetoid is now accepted as fact. 6 major extinction events are also known. 450 to 440 million years ago, caused by global cooling and sea level drop. 375 to 360 million years ago, caused by multiple causes. 252 million years ago, again caused by multiple causes. 201.3 million years ago, caused by climate change, an asteroid impact, or volcanism. 66 million years ago, the most recent, the Chicxulub asteroid, caused by the Chicxulub asteroid. This was an asteroid about 10 kilometers or 6 miles in diameter that impacted in the region of Chicxulub, Mexico. This caused the extinction of the planet's non-avian dinosaurs and other species. And finally, the 6th mass extinction event is ongoing today and is caused by human beings. In addition, Wikipedia lists 26 extinction events, the oldest about 2,400 million years ago, called the Great Oxygenation Event, the most recent of which, besides the current one, occurred 13,000 years ago. The last 5 such events have an average periodicity of about 3 million years, whereas the average lifespan of species varies between about 500,000 and 13 million years, with a median rate of 5 million years. For comparison, the human species is about 2.8 million years old. In some passages, the Buddha implies that the small, medium, and great ages, while definite, are so vast that they are incalculable. This is the famous metaphor that he uses. He uses a number, but one of the more famous ones is where he compares the length of an age to the time it would take to wear away a mountain by brushing a cloth against it once every century. However, the classical formulation gives a rate of 1 year per century. Thus, the small age is equal to 84,000 minus 10 times 2 times 100 equals 16.798 million years. 20 small ages, which is 1 medium age, is 335.96 million years. And 4 medium ages, which is 1 great age, is 1,343.84 million years ago. All of these cycles therefore fall into the 2,400 million year period mentioned above. The Earth itself was created about 4.54 billion years ago, or just over 3 Mahakapas ago. Thus, the Buddhist concept of the history of the world is entirely consistent with the scientific calculation, in striking contrast to the Semitic religions, which believe that God created the universe, including all species of life, out of nothing just about 6,000 years ago over the course of a single week. The law of karma is ubiquitous, and one of its applications is the science of physiognomy, by which the karmic inheritance of an individual can be assessed based on their physical characteristics. Thus, a great person must of necessity have a perfect body, defined by the 32 and the 80 marks. Today, we would associate this with an individual's genetic inheritance. An individual who has all of the marks is destined to become a universal ruler or a universal teacher. Such ideas may also find expression in the notion of caste. However, it is clear that the Buddha rejected the Indian notion of caste because he believed that intention could override inheritance. Thus, an individual of good birth, a concept that the Buddha clearly did not reject, is not necessarily destined to lead a superior life, nor is a person of inferior birth destined to lead an inferior life. Because karma is also generated by intention, intention creates new karma that can in turn result in a superior outcome than what might otherwise be expected, while old karma is always being eliminated by a process of maturation and can also be negated by acts of renunciation and self-purification. For this reason, the Buddha rejected the rigid notions of caste and class and admitted members of all castes and classes into the Sangha with only a few exceptions. The Buddha appears to have taken a similar attitude to race. The Buddha also implies that karmic patterns, including human associations, repeat themselves from life to life, leading to people who were associated in past lives being associated in future lives. Thus, many of the people you are closest to are probably people that you have known before. The Buddha applied the general principle of the law of karma in various ways, the most famous being his principle of dependent origination. The Pali word is paticca samuppada. The literal meaning of this word is paticca, meaning following from anything as a necessary result, plus sam, together, plus upada, coming into existence. Essentially, it means that every cause is an effect, every effect is a cause, and that the two always occur together. That is, no cause without an effect, no effect without a cause. From this it follows that everything is connected to everything else, that there are no coincidences and no accidents, but the interconnections are infinitely complex. The principle that samsara is without beginning also follows logically from the law of karma, for that would posit an uncaused cause. In fact, this principle of causality is very much the same as in science, with one important distinction: mind. Buddhism recognizes the reality of 6 senses, the 6th sense being mind. Since the existence of a sense necessarily posits the existence of objects corresponding to that sense, Buddhism refers to mind objects that are real entities, essentially no different from the objects of sight, hearing, the tactile sense, etc. The reality of mind objects means that the mind can interact with reality in ways that are indeterminate, because intention is essentially free, not merely a reflex of material causes. This must be true because reality itself must be unconditioned. Thus, the Buddhist universe is an open, creative, evolving, expanding universe, where anomalies such as psychic powers and even magic become possible against a backdrop of overall high-level order, against a backdrop of an overall high-level order, the integrity of which is maintained by karma. Yes, the Buddhist worldview allows for the possibility of magic. The utility of mantras, which simply focus and concentrate the mind and intention in specific ways, based on vast reservoirs of psychic power or energy, built up over thousands or even millions of years, also falls into this category. Buddhism is not materialism. As a non-materialist, spiritual, metaphysical philosophy, Buddhism preserves the essential humanity of the person in a way that scientific materialist ideologies, and I'm putting the word scientific there in quotation marks, in a way that scientific materialist ideologies, which I would refer to as scientistic, like communism, fascism, capitalism, and technocracy, do not. We see this increasingly today as the advance of industrialism strips us ever more and more wantonly of our essential human rights and freedoms, even while pretending to do the opposite. For this reason, the Dharma transmission to the West is essential for the future survival of humanity as we understand it. The Buddha also discovered that paticca samuppada is bidirectional, what we would call the arrow of time. In the full formulation, proliferation and ignorance, which give rise to the 5 aggregates and the 6 senses, including the karmic propensities, the sanskaras, that together constitute the self, in quotation marks, are followed by contact, craving, feeling, clinging, and becoming, and culminate in birth, aging, death, and angst. This is the arrow of time that leads from past to future states, what we call entropy. However, the essential impermanence of samsara and its constituent processes means that because they are ultimately transitory and ephemeral, they are also subject to change, and therefore they can be reversed, especially craving and ignorance, which are both directly subject to intention. Although intention is conditioned by the karmic propensities, it is essentially free, that is, it is identical with reality itself. Thus, by realizing the truth about samsara, one overcomes ignorance, and by cultivating dispassion, one overcomes clinging, thus freeing oneself from the chain of cause and effect and returning to the source, the mind stream, the continuity of consciousness, reality itself. This is the theoretical basis of the path. The Buddha compares this doctrine to a tangled ball of string and emphasizes its impenetrability. He who fully realizes the truth of paticca samuppada, he says, has realized emptiness, or the essential voidness of phenomena, which is ultimately equivalent to awakening or enlightenment itself. The law of karma leads logically to the concept of merit. Every life, at any given moment, is a veritable stew of positive and negative karmas, working themselves out in complex interactive patterns of experience based on conditions in the environment, which are themselves the result of karma and its interaction with intention, which is the ultimate cause of karma. Reality is a self-reflexive feedback loop. Thus, every person has a store of positive and negative merit, which they can draw upon at any time. We may think of this as a sort of energy potential. This energy can also be directed by intention to various ends, thus allowing us to affect our experience and the experiences of others based on the principle of dependent origination. The concept of merit leads in turn to the power of truth, an ancient Indian doctrine that also pervades the Pali Canon, based on the idea that truth, when unmitigated and absolute, has an inherent power that can be drawn upon and directed, in fact, the power of reality itself. The greatest psychic power of all, related to the power of truth, is the miracle of instruction, by which beings are saved from samsara and become able to transcend phenomenal existence altogether, which is ultimately identical with wisdom, the antithesis of ignorance, or not knowing. The power of truth is especially efficacious at the moment of death. Sorry, just give me 1 second. There we go. Leading to a doctrine and a praxis of conscious dying, which one finds worked out in the Tibetan Book of the Dead and elsewhere. Every Buddhist should prepare for the moment of death with the utmost care to ensure that their subsequent rebirth is as beneficial as possible. The path of the householder is largely based on the law of karma, merit, and the transfer of merit, and the power of truth. However, the rigid distinction between lay people and monastics found in later Buddhism is largely absent in the Pali Canon. Householders not only converted to the Buddha Dharma, but also were able to attain emancipation as well, at which time they either died or became monastics. On the other hand, many monastics made little spiritual progress at all, thus resulting in the distinction between Puthajjana and Arya monastics. In all of the wisdom traditions of antiquity, no fundamental division is made between ontology, the science of being, and psychology, the science of mind. Rather, mind is regarded as a sixth sense, as I said, and therefore mind objects are ontologically real, and mind participates actively in the creation of reality. Therefore, mind is reality, and reality is mind. This is in striking contrast to Western philosophical theories rooted in Descartes, who has decisively separated mind and matter. The West has finally abandoned the reality of mind altogether in quote-unquote scientific materialism, again what I would refer to as scientism, which asserts that mind is essentially an epiphenomenon of matter and therefore unreal. Thus, in Buddhism, realization corresponds to the progressive realization of more and more subtle states of reality. The former refers to the 4 jhanas, or ecstasies, whereas the latter are the 4 deva realms, referred to as the Brahma worlds, corresponding to the 1st jhana, the radiant devas, corresponding to the 2nd jhana, the glorious devas, corresponding to the 3rd jhana, the 5 pure abodes, corresponding to the 4th jhana, The sphere of infinite space, corresponding to the fifth jhana, the sphere of infinite consciousness, corresponding to the sixth jhana, the sphere of nothing, or no-thing, corresponding to the seventh jhana, and the sphere of neither perception nor non-perception, corresponding to the eighth jhana. However, the realization of the fourth jhana is sufficient to attain emancipation, suggesting another difference between an arhat and a Buddha. The first four jhanas, or spheres as they are called, correspond to the world of form, and the second four jhanas, or spheres, correspond to the world of formlessness. The planes of ordinary consciousness correspond to the sensual world. Altogether, these constitute the realms or worlds of samsara, which are further elaborated into 31 planes of existence, including subhuman, human, and transhuman worlds. Thus, we say that the human world is the middle world, and the world in which realization is most possible. The human world itself is considered to be the result of merit. So if merit is not cultivated in the present life, it could be lost in future lives. Human life is also rare. So it's actually more likely that one will not be reborn as a human being again, or at least not after a very long time, unless one actively cultivates merit in this life. This matters because anti-gods, ghosts, and hell beings in particular do remember why they were born where they are, whereas human beings only in rare circumstances, and animals never do remember. The worlds below the human, the worlds of anti-gods, ghosts, animals, and hell beings, are so pervaded by suffering and instinctuality that it takes a very long time to break out of them, whereas the Deva worlds above the human world are so long-lived and pleasurable that the Devas also have little motivation to practice Dharma. These planes or levels of consciousness become ever more rarefied, blissful, and powerful as one progresses up the ladder, corresponding to the gradual path culminating in cessation. Cessation, however, is strictly speaking not part of this series at all, rather like the sphere of Dat in the Kabbalistic tree of life, for those Kabbalists amongst you. Rather, cessation represents the qualitative transcendence of the whole system of samsara altogether, and the realization of an immanent state, the clear light or Buddha nature, which has always been present in the form of an essential potentiality. Thus, cessation is not produced or caused. This suggests the possibility of an alternative to the causal path, namely an acausal transcendence of the whole system that may occur in principle at any time and is therefore immediate and spontaneous. The character of this ultimate realization, that is, the action of making real, is beyond samsara. As such, it is beyond all rational categories of thought, based as they are on the law of contradiction, that is, duality. Thus, reality is transdual, transrational, and uncharacterizable, signless, boundless, and all-luminous. This, the essence of sentience itself, is essentially empty and full, differentiated and undifferentiated, proliferating and non-proliferating simultaneously. This appears to be the basis of the Buddha's dislike of speculation, not because he does not have an ontology, but rather because his ontology is transcendental and therefore not truly accessible to the unenlightened mind. This is also the basis of the two-truth doctrine. Ultimate truth is transdual, transrational, and uncharacterizable, whereas relative truth is non-absolute and therefore misleading if it is misunderstood. On the other hand, it is possible, through the intensive cultivation of wisdom, to obtain an intuition of realization which may precipitate the actual experience in one suitably prepared. The Buddha was a very clever dialectician, and he often dialogued with others by appearing to accept their premises, identifying common ground, and then subtly shifting the conversation through a progressive process of inference and deduction, causing them to see beyond their premises. This establishes Buddhism as an esoteric tradition, in that the Buddha is reinterpreting outer in terms of inner, and relating this to a forgotten primordial tradition that can only be appreciated by the few. The Buddha declares that his Dharma is ancient and long forgotten, and is identical with the way of the ancient Vedic rishis. Merely mouthing sacred texts does not, however, constitute realization, and for this reason the Buddha rejected the notion of Brahmin caste superiority. A Brahmin must live a life of utmost simplicity and renunciation. The Buddha also tailored his recommendations to the spiritual needs of the individuals with whom he communicated. So he said different, even apparently contradictory things at different times and in different circumstances. This can lead to error if it is not understood, which is why the method of logical syncretism or transcendental synthesis is the best way to study the Dharma. Using this method, of course, extremes cancel each other out, so one arrives at the middle path, the middle view, which is the Buddhist view. We can't just pick out the ideas we like and ignore those that we do not. All this leads to is the creation of a false Dharma, which is merely a projection of our own egotism. Thus, we reject sectarianism from the outset. An oft-repeated refrain of the stock description, or in the stock description of a Buddha, is that he is a teacher of humans and devas. The Pali Canon frequently alludes to deva followers of the Buddha, including even anti-gods, but their numbers are not numerous. Devas of the sensual world, in particular, seem to be addicted to sensual pleasures much as many humans are, especially in the latter days of the degenerate age in which we now live. Some devas are even earthbound, living invisibly in human cities and influencing human beings and governments telepathically. There are even deva cities, both in deva worlds and on the earth, Uttarakuru being an example that is mentioned in the Pali Canon. Interestingly, the word deva means shining one, and the Pali descriptions of devas often correspond strikingly with the UFO phenomenon, which we know, thanks to the research of people like Jacques Vallée, have a physical reality. The Buddha himself is represented as communicating with devas, teaching them, and receiving teachings from them. The Pali Canon also describes a war in heaven between the asuras, archaic deities representing abstract spiritual principles and the powers of nature, and the more anthropomorphic devas. This appears to correspond to the arising of a new religious movement within the Vedic tradition. Okay, Jospe, thank you for your time. This appears to correspond to the arising of a new religious movement within the Vedic tradition during the late Vedic period, about 1000 to 500 before the Common Era, characterized by the forgetting of the recipe for soma, and its replacement by a surrogate ritual called the fire sacrifice. Ritualism, caste, authoritarianism, and misogyny, many of the things for which the Buddha criticized the Brahmins of his time. The asuras, which originally meant lords, but was now associated with an erroneous etymology of asuras, anti-gods, were cast down to the foot of Mount Sumeru, where they dwelt in the one-world ocean. The anti-gods were still necessary to churn soma, apparently, which they churn out of the one-world ocean together with the devas. This antagonism or conflict appears to be necessary to the production of soma, which makes one wonder how soma was manufactured before the war between the devas and the asuras. This point requires additional research. The anti-gods also attended an assembly of devas, held to honor the Buddha, and some even converted to the Buddha Dharma. In the West, the conflict between the devas and the asuras resulted in the devas being cast down, and an asura, Ahura Mazda, became the chief deity of the Zoroastrian religion, also based on the principle of dualistic conflict. So, summarizing from the series of talks which I have already given, I have a series of points that I did have derived from the Pali Canon concerning the devas, that the devas visit the Buddha and that he learns from them, that deva travel is instantaneous, that devas manifest as luminous aerial phenomena, that devas are only visible to those of refined mindfulness, that some devas live invisibly upon men on earth, and that the anti-gods, specifically, are skilled in the practice of magic. Although Buddhism is widely regarded as atheistic, this is not quite true. It is referenced several times in the Pali Canon in the form of the chief of the Brahma realm, a sort of Wizard of Oz figure. The texts explain how the notion of God originates. According to the Buddhist worldview, universes appear, expand, contract, and then disappear and reappear in an endless series of cycles. Historical time is also like this, and passes through evolutionary and devolutionary phases. The beings that previously were reborn in a universe that passes into a state of potentiality are reborn in other worlds corresponding to their karma. When the universe reappears, it exists in a high energy state, and the higher devas are reborn in it as their merit in higher worlds is exhausted. The first such deva to appear finds himself alone in the universe, and erroneously concludes that he is the creator of the universe. Similarly, the devas that come after him see that he came before, and erroneously conclude that he is the creator of the universe. Thus, he asserts himself to be God, and they accept this and worship him as God, resulting in the creation of religion. Thus, the delusion of belief in God arises in beings. Moreover, for this reason and others, Buddhism itself cannot be regarded as a religion, properly speaking, and in fact, it has not been legally acknowledged as a religion in many places for exactly this reason. Buddhism is a metaphysical and practical spiritual philosophy, not a religion. Far from declaring himself to be an innovator or the originator of a new truth or a new religious movement, the Buddha claimed to be revealing an ancient way that has long been forgotten, which he identifies with the progenitors of the Brahmins, the ancient Vedic rishis, illuminated seers consisting of both men and women, whose ecstatic poems are recorded in the Vedas, especially the Rig Veda, but which is also pre-Vedic. Thus he is revealing to the Brahmins, whom he castigates as degenerate, the original truth of Brahmanism itself. He compares this to an ancient and long-forgotten city in the midst of an archaic forest, the path to which is overgrown and barely discernible. The Buddha declares that the true Brahmin is one who has wisdom and virtue, not someone born into a caste. Someone born into the Brahmin caste who does not have these essential qualities is not a Brahmin, and someone who is not born into the Brahmin caste who has these essential qualities is a Brahmin, in accordance with the law of karma. The same distinction applies to monastics. One may be a monastic and a Puthajjana, or a common person, or one may be a householder and be an Aryan, a noble or spiritual person. Monastic ordination does not by itself an Aryan make. Thus, both Hinayana and Mahayana traditions allow for self-ordination. The Buddha himself was, of course, self-ordained. Of these two, wisdom and not virtue is the preeminent salvific principle, with virtue as its necessary basis, subject to the qualification concerning ethics that we have already discussed. However, a tree is known by its fruits. The Dharma always yields good fruits. The Buddha teaches the path of the Arhat, the Noble Eightfold Path, consisting of 4 levels of attainment of degrees of progressive realization or accomplishment. Stream entrant, whereby one achieves emancipation within 7 rebirths without ever experiencing a lower, non-human rebirth. A once returner, whereby one is reborn as a human being once more only. A non-returner, whereby one is never again reborn as a human being, but will be reborn as a deva being in the 5 pure abodes, or an arhat, in which on death one achieves paranibbana, literally complete snuffing out, as of a fire, and subsequent immortality. The Pali word is amata. This Pali word amata pervades the Pali Canon and is generally translated as deathlessness, but the Pali English dictionary makes it clear that the primary meaning is amrita, translated by Rhys Davids as ambrosia or water of immortality, from the Sanskrit root mr, meaning death. Amrita, which is also described in the Pali English dictionary as a medicine, is the Buddhist word for soma, the Vedic mind-altering sacrament that is identical with the plant-based psychedelic that was worshipped by the early Aryans and inspired the rishis, including the 7 sages so-called, to write the ecstatic hymns of the Rig Veda. Mata means both thought and dead, so the state of amata is a state beyond both death and thinking. Paradoxically, a state of apparent impercipience is identical with the realization of sentience itself, hence deathlessness. And I just point out, I'm seeing some chat passing by me as I'm going through the talk. I am looking for question marks, so I'm glad to see that people are communicating with each other and submitting their thoughts on the talk. But if you do have a question, please make sure there is a question mark in your chat, or else I will not notice it. Although the Buddha taught the path of the Arhat as the fast path to nirvana, based on dispassion, and the Buddha himself is declared to be an Arhat, it is clear from the Pali texts that an Arhat is not identical with the Buddha. The path that leads to Buddhahood is the path of a bodhisattva, literally an enlightenment being. The essential distinction appears to be that between dispassion, in which desire's attachment is negated, thus breaking the chain of dependent origination, and wisdom, in which ignorance is resolved by a kind of omniscience. The Pali Canon makes a clear distinction between the powers or attainments of Arhats and the powers or attainments of Buddhas. This idea was taken up by the Mahayana, which originally consisted of followers of the Hinayana who formulated the intention, known as bodhicitta, to attain Buddhahood out of compassion for all samsaric beings rather than arhatship. The question arises, of course, why the Buddha chose to teach the path of the Arhat rather than the path of the Bodhisattva. And the answer seems to be, and this is still tentative on my part, but the answer seems to be that he did this because of the severe limitations of beings born into this degenerate age, with the very short, relatively speaking, lifespan of only 100 to 120 years. Although I am still researching this question and may have additional insights on this point in the future. When a bodhisattva becomes a Buddha, he creates a negentropic information wave that radiates out in all directions from its point of origin, the so-called bodhiseat, creating a world age which expands and dissipates over a more or less long period. Thus, we find that human civilization focused in northeast India decreases in all directions as a function of distance and also as a function of time. Because each such age has its unique origin in the appearance of one unique Buddha, it is said that no other Buddha can appear in that world age until its Dharma manifestation dissipates. The Dharma itself is timeless, of course, and never dissipates. The motive power of this expansion is the power of truth. The current Dharma age originated in the Paranibbana of Siddhartha Gautama Buddha in about 400 before the Common Era, and is only now beginning to penetrate Western civilization at the midpoint of the 5,000-year cycle that, the Buddha said, would be the duration of his Dharma manifestation. This corresponds to the year 2100 of the Common Era approximately. Thus, we see that the 21st century seems to represent a turning point in human civilization, both the nadir of the degenerate age of the last 1,000 years, culminating in the year 2012, the end of the Mayan epoch that also corresponds with the advent of the Kali Yuga, and with the possibility of a transformative emanation that may propel human beings into a new evolutionary period, or alternatively, the extinction of the human species on this earth, depending on how we choose to respond to it. The Buddha enumerates the benefits of monastic life, including the 4 jhanas or ecstasies, consisting of detachment, concentration, tranquility, and mental purity and clarification, culminating in the perfection of insight. A group of magical or psychic powers, which were clearly considered seriously as Moggallana, one of the 2 foremost disciples of the Buddha, was reputed to be foremost in psychic powers, follows these. These include the creation of a mental body, visionary experiences, clairaudience, the perception of spiritual sounds, telepathy, recalling past lives, and the divine eye, whereby one perceives patterns of karmic cause and effect imperceptible to others, culminating in perfect mindfulness and full awakening. The Buddha also emphasizes the importance of mindfulness of the body, referring to meditation on the body in terms that are frankly sensual. The great Theravadian scholar, Buddhaghosa, says that this focus on the mindfulness of the body is a unique distinguishing characteristic of the Buddha Dharma. The Buddha frequently uses the motif of past lives to dramatize teachings in the present. Whether this was based on actual memories or as a dramatic device of the Buddha is unknown, but it developed into the idea that the Buddha was actually able to recall past lives, and that this psychic power is a characteristic of a Buddha. This ability is strongly emphasized throughout the Pali Canon, unlike the other psychic powers which the Buddha considered to be of limited spiritual value. Unlike most, perhaps all religions, the Buddhist suttas begin with what the teaching is not. Moreover, the Buddha decries emotional faith and insists that his followers should inquire into the Dharma dispassionately, using the faculty of reason but without being limited by it or dependent upon it. Finally, the Buddha dismisses ethics and morality as elementary, inferior, trivial, insignificant, and minor matters that may impress common uneducated people, the Puthajjana, but the Tathagata, he who has attained the Tat, suchness, reality, or the Absolute, is far beyond all such considerations, having attained a state beyond reason. The Tathagata is literally described, therefore, as transhuman. The Buddha emphasizes this point by summarizing the rules of morality, including the famous 5 precepts: not killing, not stealing, not lying, not engaging in sexual wrongdoing, and, after about the year 427 before the Common Era, not drinking alcohol, which was not originally prohibited, and a host of other ethical and monastic rules. It's obvious, of course, the so-called Vinaya. This liberal attitude to rules, which we also find indicated by the Buddha's behavior throughout his life, led to the accusation of laxness, an accusation that also dogged him throughout his career, paradoxically, since the Buddha made the same accusations against the Brahmins, and he also complained about the laxness of the monastics toward the end of his life. The Buddha also rejects 62 kinds of wrong views, including speculative theories about the past and the future. However, he also rejects agnosticism and nihilism, and clearly states that although he discourages speculations, he himself knows the truth concerning these matters, thus contradicting the widespread notion that the Buddha did not have an ontology. The form in which the Buddha rejected these theories is the tetralemma, a logical structure that rejects all possible formulations of a proposition, such as A is A is not A is both A and not A is neither A nor not A. The tetralemma is not simply a rejection of the premise, otherwise A is not A would be true. Rather, it appears to reject the law of contradiction itself, because the truth of the matter transcends all forms of logical expression, and we might add linguistic expression, therefore, necessarily. That is, it transcends dualistic logic and reason and language altogether. Thus, the tetralemma appears to refer to the translogical, transdual, translinguistic, and transrational character of the Buddha's realization of truth, rather than simply rejecting a specific doctrinal formulation in favor of its antithesis. In the words of Alfred Korzybski, the founder of general semantics, the map is not the territory. The most famous example of this is the Buddha's rejection of the atta, loosely but inaccurately translated as self. The Buddha also rejects the reliability of direct realization or intuition as a source of information. Indeed, all views whatsoever simply lead one to rebirth in whatever world corresponds to that view. None is ultimate. Implicitly, therefore, all such views are false and do not lead to ultimate realization, which is inherently empty, uncharacterizable, and dispassionate. The Buddha's attitude toward rules is, therefore, quite ambivalent. On the other hand, he advocates a life of moderate austerity and simplicity based on self-restraint. On the other hand, he disparages extreme asceticism and self-torture, and dismisses the intrinsic efficacy of rites and rituals. Even ethics are relatively unimportant. Thus he refers to the three higher trainings in morality, heart or meditation, and wisdom, which, he says, is harder but more efficacious than the merely mechanical rules of conduct, the Vinaya, which at that time numbered about 150 rules. And at the end of his life he conceded that rules should not be expanded, that the rules should not be expanded, and that the minor and lesser rules could be ignored. This view is, of course, in striking contrast to the organizationalism, hierarchicalism, authoritarianism, and dogmatism of many Buddhist societies today, both in Asia and the West. The Buddha clearly advocated what today we would call a liberal progressive political philosophy, including animal rights, human rights, and state support of the social infrastructure, including agriculture, capital, a well-paid bureaucracy and working class, and direct democratic government, as well as low taxes and liberal laws. The Pali Canon even presents the Buddha with something resembling the right-wing libertarian movement, which is sometimes called neoliberalism, which he rejects out of hand. Eastern society appears to be escalating, Western society, and because of the dominance of the West, global society, appears to be escalating towards a general civil war and perhaps even a world war at this time of social and environmental crisis, with a window to irremediable calamity of perhaps 30 years based on the wanton spewing of carbon into the atmosphere because of burning fossil fuels. Nothing less than a global spiritual revolution will do. The Buddha is very critical of money and business, associating it with cheating and lying, and the monastics were forbidden from trading or handling money, although the Sangha itself owned property which was given to it in the form of donations. The Buddha also criticized property and territoriality, and the most advanced human beings on the northern continent of Uttarakuru were said to be communists who practiced free love based on the ancient Rishi tradition. Finally, while on this topic of love and women, many of you will know that I have mentioned misogyny quite prominently in these talks, especially in my talk on the status of women in ancient India and the Pali tradition. Interestingly, there are few negative references to women in the Digha Nikaya compared to later sutras, so we haven't dwelled on this too much in our series of talks on the Digha Nikaya. At the end of his life, the Buddha does warn Ananda against fraternizing with women, so there's a little bit of it in the Digha Nikaya, but not very much, and there is a female spiritual aspirant who vows to be reborn as a man in order to make spiritual progress, and, because of the power of truth, achieves this goal. On the other hand, there is an ecstatic poem, comparable in some ways to the Song of Solomon in the Bible, in which arhantship and the love of the Dharma is compared to the love of a woman. That concludes my talk. Went a little faster than I anticipated. Thank you very much for your attention. That completes my series of talks on the 34 suttas of the Digha Nikaya. Before we conclude with the dedication of merit, followed by the draw for a copy of the book. Does anyone have any questions or discussion or anything they would like to discuss or say or respond to in connection with this or any of the other talks that we've been engaged in over the past 34 weeks? While you're thinking about that, I'll just get a copy of the dedication of merit. Okay, it seems no one has any questions, so let's proceed with the dedication of merit, whereby we dedicate the merit of this talk to all beings. Whatever understanding, whatever positive force has come from this, may it go deeper and deeper and act as a cause to reach enlightenment for the benefit of all. Thank you very much for this opportunity to discuss Dharma. It is my pleasure and privilege. Namaskar.